for making time today. I'm very excited to be covering this topic, which is one of the areas of passion of mine. And so hopefully you've got a way to at least take a few notes, because I'm going to try to cover a lot of components to retirement that I think hopefully one or two things will help you kind of refine your approach with clients, and whether you're somebody that does assets under management, somebody that does annuities, somebody that does both, or fee only, or what have you. I think there's going to be something in here for everybody. So that's me, and that's another picture. I've been fortunate to be in this place for, yeah, she said 18 years, which makes me seem old. I'm not that old, but I've just been happy to be able to do this for a little while. So let's talk about just the order of the conversation. All right. We're going to start out with, how do we have effective conversations with clients about retirement? Because I think I've seen a lot of people take a variety of approaches. I want to hopefully give you an idea for how you can do this, and not just make it easy in a diminutive way, but make it easy in a conversational and engaging way that allows people to come to the table and be more prepared to take action. Because no matter what we do in all of these things that I'm going to go over, if we're not really engaging our clients and helping them move the needle or make more effective decisions, then there's a breakdown. We're not doing something right. So I'm also going to cover some of the things that go on in our industry where we kind of, pirate each other or make it harder and set up some barriers. So I'm going to cover some of that as well. I'm going to talk about risk, understand why, how using this pyramid is a very easy approach that any of you can take and adopt. And then, I'm going to make sure by the end of it, I'll help you close the sale and move the needle forward. So soup to nuts, the whole process and everything in between. All right. So I don't know about you, but for me, when I talk to clients about retirement, the problem that a lot of people might have is the word retirement. Because if you're not knocking on the door of retirement, if I turn around and talk to a 40-year-old or 35-year-old or somebody that's newly married with kids, the word retirement really is a very intangible concept. It's like, I might as well say, hey, Rich Messina, you want to go to the moon tomorrow? Sure, great, because that's about as close of a concept as you're going to have for, you want to stop working and start paying yourself income, right? Because that's what we're talking about. So I find that the conversations I try to have are less about that word and more about, well, let's think about a period of time in your life when your lifestyle is going to change. And let's talk about, what are your aspirations for the future? How do you see yourself stepping out of full-time employment, right? What are the kind of things that you think of when it comes to, one day not working? And really keep the focus on that word lifestyle, and allow clients to talk about lifestyle perpetuation or really the things that they want to enjoy. Because when you're able to get clients almost dreaming or really thinking about the practical reality, not just the financial reality, it's a far more motivating conversation. The other necessary part of this is to make sure that we understand that income obviously is the thread that supports everything that we do. And so as I'm having this conversation, I'm also talking about, we start to open that door of, okay, well, now that you've helped me understand what your thoughts and aspirations and goals and what you think, this golden year time is going to look like, how much do you think that costs, right? And that's how we start to kind of have that moment of, okay, if this is what I really want to see myself doing, and these are the people that I want to be doing that stuff with, how can we start to create a framework for saying, all right, well, how am I going to afford that or make that a reality, a financial reality? I think the other thing is, and we're going to get into this a lot more, is risk. Because again, depending on where you are and how close you are to the retirement doorstep, you probably don't necessarily think of you don't think of risks the same way. And you've probably heard other people talk about, how we approach saving for retirement and the way that we even cognitively think about that is actually very different than when you get into, when you move out of that accumulation mentality to the de-accumulation, right, to the spending side. It's a very different framework. And so risk in the accumulation strategy obviously changes when it comes to now taking money out of a variety of sources. And so we want to make sure that we have both sides of that conversation. And also when we're talking to clients about ways that they might solve income, that we continue that risk conversation. So what risks exist? Well, let's make sure that we cover them, right? Obviously, I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think most of us understand that, but it is important to make sure that we are allowing clients to recognize that there is more than one risk. Most of the time I've found clients think of risk in terms of market risk because, you can turn on any financial news network or what have you, and it's kind of like, well, the market's down 20%. Oh, okay, that's my risk, right? It's portfolio risk, market risk, what have you. Inflation risk is a little bit maybe harder to understand. People understand it cognitively, but they don't necessarily understand it from a practical standpoint because it's very hard to feel inflation risk. So, but it is something that we can kind of, talk about in terms of frames of reference, whether it's, I had somebody say, well, have you ever taken a look, just Google search, what a stamp cost in 1950, right? And then you see what a stamp costs today. Or there's a lot of, things that maybe that doesn't fit your lexicon, but, where we can say, the price of X, Y, and Z is likely going to change moving forward. And we got to make sure that your buying power doesn't, get eroded and all that kind of stuff. Sequence of return risk. So understated and yet so very important. But how do I talk about that? Well, I just say this is just the risk of bad luck and bad timing, right? Because, we don't know when that next big crash is going to happen. Just imagine how you would have felt if you retired in 2008 and all of a sudden your first entree into taking money out of all of your hard-earned savings was to the tune of, oh no, the money I was counting on is now down 40%, right? But you could have retired in 2010 and had a somewhat substantially different experience. Obviously, you still suffered that, but we don't know. And so really helping them understand that it's not just the market risk component that we're trying to address in terms of risk management, reducing downside capture and maximizing up, all that kind of stuff. It's really just about what can happen if, this is when you've scheduled yourself to stop working and all of a sudden things go sideways because we don't have that kind of control. And then longevity is really, we talked about the risk of running out of money. I think it's just a function of let's make sure that the start of your lifestyle when you retire continues and is optimized for as long as you remain retired. And that means that your money has to be there to give you the best retirement possible. We don't want you to lose out on your experience of retirement later in it because we don't do certain things well to make sure that we preserve it. So I still try to contextualize as much as I can in a conversational way, really still focusing on the experience, not just the dollars and cents and the money. And now, how do we talk about income creation? Because this is the crux of it all. And really, there are three main options in our industry. We can talk about, well, there's a few outliers or something, but when it comes to people retiring, what are where does most of the money go? What are the financial instruments or vehicles? This is it, right? We either have people taking money out of an investment portfolio, we have people using income annuities, and we have people using variable annuities. And that's probably, the majority of retirement assets are flowing into one of these three places. And sure, it's not meant to be an exhaustive list, but it's the majority. And so I just find it very important. My approach has always been, I want to make sure that the first thing that I do for a client is help them understand all of these options, not just one. Okay, so that's maybe an important point that hopefully, you can recognize that it's really critical that we lay things out and let people know, hey, you can do this or you can do that. That these are all options that don't compete against one another, right? And that's an important thing that I've learned from a a framework standpoint, is that I don't want to set myself up to lead somebody any one way. I really just want them to be able to reconcile what things are and what they aren't. Okay. So in a little bit more context to that, and there's a couple of ways now I'm going to talk about how I go through this in a second. But you can kind of see, a pyramid from a visualization standpoint is a little bit easy to understand. People have seen the bucket approach when it comes to, understanding how to save and taxes and all that kind of stuff. I just really find that, this kind of upward funnel, when you're talking about each piece and the part it can play in terms of dependability, predictability, and risk, it just makes a very easy framework that people can get their head around. So that's part of why this visual came together to begin with, and why I like to just present it that way. You can whiteboard this really easily, so I know if when we get back to, in-person stuff, it's great to have all the visuals, the book and all that, but a lot of times I just go to the drawing board and I kind of collaboratively talk with the client through it, and it can be very powerful. All right, so let's talk about the top of the pyramid first. You can decide if you want to take a different order, but as I go through this, I'm going to tell you why I do it this way. Because again, I think that there's an effective order of the madness rather than just kind of saying, all right, there's this, and then there's this, and then there's this. So, I start with saying, all right, Mr. or Mrs. Client, or what have you, Rich Messina, one of the ways that people go about generating income, one of the vehicles that they do, and most people understand, is you have kind of an investment portfolio of some kind, whether you consolidate funds into an IRA, or whether it's built on mutual funds, stocks, bonds, ETFs, what have you. What you're really doing is you're creating an investment platform for yourself, and probably, hopefully working with an advisor. You're making selections about how it's diversified, and then you're going to take distributions out of this account, right? And that's going to be how we're using this vehicle to generate income. And so, mechanically, people pretty much understand that because they already understand how to invest and save. So this is not that hard to really explain, but it's important that we tell them there's two ways that you're going to mechanically take money out if you decide that you want to do this from an investment portfolio, right? So option number one is taking the safe withdrawal approach. And we understand that as a percentage, right? You can, and the percentage, by the way, is still a bit of a very topic as to what's the right percentage. At one point, some people were saying it could be 5%. Well, now, is it 4? Is it 3.5? Is it 3? Regardless, whichever one you think makes sense or fits, you just want to let them know, all right, we're going to invest this a certain way. And what you're going to do is take this safe percentage number, let's just say 4%. And, hopefully that means that the returns in the portfolio will not just be enough to substantiate that 4%, but will be a little bit better. So that way, that amount will grow, and keep pace with inflation over time. The other way that you can take money out is to say, hey, Brian, I don't know, whatever 4% equals, this is what I need each month, $5,000 a month, whatever that is. So you're either taking a percentage out or you're taking a stated dollar amount out month over month, right? And so people, again, intuitively understand that. And so why it's important to frame both of those things, because when we get into the conversation of risk, we want to help them understand how mechanically both of those might work in certain risk situations. What are the pros and what are the cons, right? So I also make sure that we go into, well, why might somebody really want to do this? Well, we understand this. The advantages are, first of all, you can get a really reasonable fee structure depending on how you do this, whether you're in a managed account or a mutual fund only or a brokerage or what have you. you should be able to really optimize and minimize the fees and the costs associated with investing, right? You've got kind of the world at your disposal in terms of investment options. And again, most of us, running on an advisory platform, you can kind of take this in any direction you feel makes sense for the client. So really, they've got a wide array of options to pick from. And the big thing that people are attracted to about this option is the control that you have, because you can decide, how am I going to invest? When do I want to, how do I want to take money out, making any changes, et cetera. You get maximum control over that. So that's a big advantage. Now, what are the disadvantages? What are the cons of this approach? Because it sounds like it's really good. What do you need to recognize? Well, with total control, you're also assuming all of the risks, right? You're not just assuming the market risk. That's a part of it. And we all, again, understand you can't eliminate market risk no matter how good of a portfolio manager you and your advisor may be. But you're also assuming the risk of distribution. So this is when I get into, let's also make sure that we understand what happens in, if the account value goes down, let's just say 20%. Well, if you're taking a 4% distribution, you just saw your income go down, whatever that number is, went down by 20%. That's a risk, right? In retirement, is not something that you want to experience. Would you be concerned about that? Would that force you to feel like you needed to change the percentage, or increase to a higher percentage that could risk or jeopardize the portfolio? Just, again, we're just talking about risk, right or wrong, good or bad. If that happens, you have to reconcile that. If I'm taking out a dollar amount, what's the risk there, right? Portfolio erosion, because $5,000 a month might at the start, maybe that's equal to 3.5%. But if my account value just went down by 20%, that $5,000 a month might now be a higher percentage than I might otherwise think of. And so if I still need to make that happen and my account's not recovering the way that it should be, that stated dollar value could now be at a rate of distribution that's not safe, or could be jeopardizing the portfolio's longevity, right? So again, I think all of us maybe understand this intuitively and understand this professionally, but it's important that we're just having these types of conversations with our clients and just allowing them to understand that for themselves, because we tend to just focus on and wrap our heads around the things that we like the most and that we see, but we don't necessarily see the other components. And so you want to lay this out in just a very straightforward pro and con. They're also, again, there are no guarantees. We already talked about that. And beneficiary options. So if this is, if you're trying to set yourself up, and if you wanted to make sure that, when something happens to you, that there's money left over, it's going to be what it's going to be in terms of what's in the account value. So we understand that may be, again, something that people want to be aware of. Now, I go to the other end of the spectrum. And again, there's a method to this madness. So this is why I do this. I like to kind of frame both of the extremes, because I think people can wrap their heads around it, and then it makes explaining the third option a little bit easier. So I say, another way that people can go and create income is to kind of pursue, an insurance contract that provides you a guarantee. So similar to creating your own pension, or, and if sometimes you get into the concept of pensions or Social Security and stuff like that. A lot of times people like to make sure that, they have about as much of their needed expenses covered, so they don't have to think about it. And the last thing you want to do when you come into retirement is worry that you're going to have enough coming in your bank account to pay all the bills that need to get paid, right? So if that's something that you think is important, then options that really make sure that, you can complement your Social Security strategy, or, you just build up an entire base of guaranteed predictable income, then this might be a vehicle that could really work. And so using an insurance contract, you're going to an insurance company, and what they're doing is they're mitigating that risk, the risk of the income fluctuating and not being there, and they're giving you a guarantee, right? So what are the pros of this? Number one, we just said it, right? It's guaranteed. It's guaranteed by the insurance company providing it. So we understand that, we have to make sure that they understand how that works and how those guarantees play out, and how are those insurance companies protected, et cetera. But you have that word there, guarantee. There's no market risk, or generally not necessarily a market component to it, and also no fees. Now, is there a cost? Well, yes, the time value of money. And this, again, you want to explain, well, what does that mean? What, no fees, it's free? Well, no, hold on. Usually similar to, or, akin to, like when you have, if you were to go and invest in a CD, the bank doesn't say, these are the fees for the CD. They tell you, okay, thanks. We're going to pay you this interest rate for this period of time when you kind of, want to keep the money there. If you broke the CD prematurely, you're not necessarily experiencing a fee. You're just either losing some of the value and or some of the interest, or both, right? So that's, again, just from a framework and understanding standpoint, some of the things that we can do to try to help explain these types of things. So there's some advantages to that. Income annuities are built around, they're kind of like the opposite of life insurance. And I start to try to get into this a little bit, right? How does an income annuity really work? Well, it works off of a distribution rate, right? The insurance company is going to try to maximize an amount of income that they can guarantee for as long of, whatever kind of lifetime you're provided. And that rate should be hopefully better than maybe what you can find in alternative scenarios. So I'm going to get into that in a second, but just making sure that you help a client understand how it works functionally. And you talk about distribution rate, and I'll help you understand how to frame distribution rate in just a second. Also, an additional pro of this is if you're also trying to make sure that you're protecting somebody else, a spouse, or leaving something behind, then you can build that in and have some survivor protection available that you don't have in the other scenario. So that can be something that they want to be aware of as well. Downsides, disadvantages. Generally no market component for growth, especially if it's the fixed side. Now we can use indexed annuities to facilitate this as well, which, again, do you want to say that has a market component? I mean, technically there's an understanding as to how the returns work, but in general, a lot of times, especially just for the straight income annuities, there's not a component, a market component. You're also losing control. So we talked about total control, and with total control comes total risk, where in a lot of these situations, when you're going to these vehicles, there's not many ways that you can kind of reverse course and get back out. So you want to explain that. Certain carriers have certain restrictions in terms of how much you could get, or all that kind of stuff. So that can vary a little bit. But in general, you really want people to understand, you are trading control of these funds in for the guarantee of income. And that's just, again, that may be considered a downside. You want to be aware of that, right? Now, how do we help people understand the distribution rate? So here's a funny scenario, whether you like Captain America and Marvel or whatever. So this is how, I can explain it. An income annuity is designed to maximize your income. The insurance company is trying to, if it's going to be something that's appealing, then the amount that they are going to be able to pay you should be better than what you can do on the street or yourself, right? Theoretically. And so in this scenario, right, we're building this out so you guys can see both of this. It's on a column format. Hypothetically, 200,000, Captain America, age 65, right, with a COLA of 3% compounding. So the other component to this, right, is, I don't want to just show you straight income only with no COLA, because that number could be pretty high, but it won't change. We really want to make sure that this does keep pace with inflation. So we're going to put that in there. And life with cash refund, which probably fits a lot of scenarios where it's kind of the balance of, okay, I don't necessarily try to cover too many lives, but if something happens to you during this payout, then your beneficiaries will get what would have been left over, or what would have been paid out had you lived, right? So it's kind of an effective balance. And in this case, according to one of the illustrations I grabbed, you're getting just shy of $10,000. Okay, so that's a good number. $200,000 is generating $10,000, right? On the other side, if we compare that to a safe withdrawal strategy where we're taking out 3.5% off of 200,000, I'd only be able to safely generate 7,000, right? So this is that, delta, that's the power an income annuity could provide. that people need to understand. Okay, well, how much money would I have to safely generate the same amount from a portfolio withdrawal situation? If you kind of do the math, you need roughly 275,000 to get to the same number that you can get to with 200. Okay, so if you already present this way, great, and I'm telling you something you already know. But this to me is a really effective and easy way to help them kind of see, okay, now I understand the distribution rate. They're really maximizing the amount that they're going to guarantee, and that amount also has a cost of living. So, I don't have to get that 200,000 to grow in order to get that income amount to grow. It's all built into that guarantee, right? Okay. Now, since we've explained both ends of the spectrum, now we're going to talk about, well, this third option, what it tries to do is it tries to bring some of the pros of both of those ends together. Okay, so what a variable annuity does is it allows you to continue to invest and determine how those funds will grow. You have a menu of investments depending on the provider that you can choose from, and you have some control over that. You have multiple options to consider, and you can get some market returns associated with your funds. However, what it does is they're protecting you. They're giving you a guarantee. What's the guarantee? What protection are you getting with a variable annuity? It's protecting your paycheck, which is the thing that we probably in retirement want protected the most, right? That's why I would go to an income annuity, to make sure I got that guaranteed income amount covering my necessary expenses. And I know it's not going to go down. It's going to keep pace with inflation. So if I can find a vehicle that will still protect my paycheck in some way, maybe that's something I want to consider. Well, how do they do that? Well, they do it by, creating kind of an insurance wrap around that investment portfolio, and they charge you a cost of insurance. So to get an insurance company to give you a guarantee, you're going to pay for insurance, right? So how this works functionally is bringing those two worlds together. Is you get the investment component and you get the insurance guarantee component. You want to understand how it's designed and how it's going to work, depending on, again, what your provider is and how that builds out. So the advantages here in a variable annuity situation are you still get to control, and you get to control the timing, the distribution, kind of how the guarantees, are going to work for you, depending on how much you want to take out, how you want to take advantage of that. It also has some, death benefit components as well. So there's some spousal protection if that's important to you. The downside, of course, is the fact that you're paying an insurance cost. So there's a higher cost to grow these funds, and we can very easily explain that. But, one of the easiest ways I've found to kind of overcome a lot of the natural, hey, I don't like annuities, or I don't believe in annuities, or whatever the stuff out there, right, is to say, well, let's not directly assess that. Let's talk about what is it that you don't like. Do you like the idea of an insurance company making sure that if you we talked about sequence of return risk, right? If you retire at the wrong time, would you want to have the highest potential paycheck for yourself still there, even if you didn't have the funds available to support it? Or would you have to scale back that lifestyle until you could recover enough to pay yourself at the rate that you were trying to, right? Okay, so does it make sense to then have an expense associated with getting that guarantee? So a lot of times just kind of really very basically putting these things together and allowing people to understand, well, they're more expensive. Well, but does the expense make sense? Is it justifiable, right? Do you understand why you would pay an insurance cost and what you would get for it? Because when people really actually think about it, then they can say, oh, okay, yeah, maybe that does make sense. Maybe if I look at this illustration and I see how in this, scenario, when the market tanked and the account value went down by 40%, that guaranteed income number still went up. Oh, wow. Like if I was in that situation, I would probably really appreciate the fact that I was in this type of a situation, that I was in this vehicle, right? The downsides we talked about, so increased costs. Some providers may have more investment restrictions than others. So you obviously want to do provider due diligence. And certainly if you're investing, there's market risk associated with that as well. that's the spectrum, and it just laid out from portfolio withdrawals to income annuities to variable annuities. And again, taking this type of approach, what it really does is it allows people to understand each option, right? And I don't lay it out in a manner that says, well, they're better or worse. I just really want clients to be able to understand them, reconcile for themselves. And then, ask them, well, what do you like? What stands out to you? Was there anything that's confusing? Does something resonate more than others? Do you like certain things about these? Do you have questions on them, right? And then we start to get into that kind of a conversation. Because I think what our industry has really done a poor job of is we created a false scenario of competition, that there's one right way to go about doing this, right? And there are people out there in the industry, talking heads or what have you, professionals that say, annuities are the devil, or annuities are this. You can never, blah, blah, blah. And I'm never afraid of any of that, because frankly, some of those things and some of those misconceptions and some of that actually fuels making this type of an approach easier, because I talk to my clients about it and I deal with that head on. So I kind of want to maybe take some time to go through some of those common, objections that you might get. And this is one of the ways to help you do that. So first of all, making sure that by taking this approach, we're already telling our clients that these are not in competition. The variable annuity is not better than an income annuity, and it's not better than a portfolio withdrawal. They're all just options. You also want to let people know you don't have to select just one. The great thing about this is, because you have options, maybe there's a reason to allocate resources into each. Maybe we would design an income generating strategy that takes advantage of the things with each one of them. So we could build this however you want to. If you wanted to just use one, great. If you want to use two, great. If you want to use all three in tandem and there's a strategy involved in that, that can work as well, right? So then people don't feel like they have to pick one. They understand that they can kind of customize this situation for themselves. Because that's the other thing that I've seen far too many, I think, professionals do as a disservice to themselves, is they kind of almost want to frame one of these that you're really interested in. If you're really trying to go and get VA money and get a bunch of money in variable annuities, then you kind of maybe don't present some of these other options as balanced, or you really pump up one and kind of don't do a disservice to the others. I don't know if it's because you're afraid you're not going to get the money. This way, I know I'm going to get the money, and I just have to now work with the client to say, well, where does it need to go? I don't have to worry about, I just presented one solution, and now somebody else that presents these other things in more fairness could get that opportunity, because instead of talking about annuities, I said, oh no, the annuities are the devil. Or I don't want to talk about portfolio options, right? Because I might not get money into an annuity. This way you don't have to really worry about that. This is also a very compliance-friendly way of approaching this, because you can say, yes, I went through all of these options and I addressed all the pros and cons. And so, taking this type of approach, I've just found really reduces and eliminates the objections. And it becomes, if there's still an objection, or if somebody still says, well, so-and-so says that annuities are too expensive. And I say, well, let's talk about that. Or, annuities just take your money and don't get it back. So, well, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how it actually works. And let's talk about what your concern is. What are you the most concerned about? When you say annuities are too expensive, what do you mean by that? Right? What does that mean to you? Are you worried about paying too much in expenses? Are you worried about paying a fee that you don't need or can't justify? Because more often than not, that's kind of where somebody's probably coming from. And so again, a lot of that type of stuff, you can really just then have a conversation. Well, okay, here's how it works. And yeah, I don't have to hide from the fact that there's a fee involved with this option, but does it make sense, right? What would the fee be? How much would your expenses actually be? And could we still use this to your advantage? Does what you get for it make sense, right? Does getting an income annuity that gives you a really good distribution rate that maybe allows you to take 1/3 of your assets and move it into this vehicle, not have to worry about it, and know that I've just covered all of my, necessary expenses because I did that. And now I can free up the other 2/3 to do other things with, right? Does that make sense? So, again, when you walk through each of these and you really just help people connect to them in a very meaningful pro and con kind of way, then at the end of the day, what you're doing to close the sale is just say, let's design things the way that you think fits you best. And you tell me what you like, don't like, and don't want. And if you want to say no to any one of these, that's fine, right? But at least you feel like you understand why you are and why you're not. All right. Now, I wrote a book on this, which kind of covers all of this in more detail, but it's a pretty quick read. So, again, not trying to push books on you, but if you feel like you want to have a very easy way to open a door, or if you're trying to prospect and you want to try to have this conversation with your clients, this is a really great resource to be able to use. Just literally send it to them in advance. I obviously do this myself. It's a quick read. Believe me, if you take 2 days to read the book, then it's surprising. It's not that long. It's just very straightforward. And then, I just say, please go through it, take notes, and let's use that as the start for our conversation. We start to get into this, highlight things, etc. It allows them to feel more prepared to have this conversation to begin with, and it should make your job a lot easier. If you think that this is an approach that you kind of want to use for yourself. All right, let's chat. I covered a lot of ground, and I hope somebody at least has a question or two or wants to understand something further. So fire away.
Yep, so just a quick reminder, everyone is on mute, but to take yourself off of mute, there's a microphone icon at the bottom of your screen. You can just click to ask a question. You can also chat a question, and I have a quick one to get us started, Brian, if you don't mind.
Yep.
So what are the biggest objections that you get after you? And I think that the point you made in terms of taking a very balanced approach, one product isn't better or worse than the other. It depends on what the client's needs are. But after you go through the presentation and you ask them kind of what stuck out to you, do you get questions about objections around annuities? And if so, what are they and how do you overcome them?
No, yeah, absolutely. Because and again, I'm sure I'm hearing all the same stuff that we all hear once the word annuity comes out. So it can depend on what it is. I heard annuities are bad, right? Okay, well, and usually, frankly, the best way to overcome an objection is to not answer it. So I just say, wow, that's interesting. So first thing I always say is, well, tell me what you mean by that. When you say that to me, I want to make sure that I understand. So what do you mean? What's the concern that you're talking about that you really don't like? And I need to make sure, again, first of all, we need to know what the objection really is. So we don't want to ever take it at face value. And I think a lot of times, I've seen a lot of professionals, advisors, and kind of be afraid that, if somebody doesn't like or doesn't respond positively to one of these things, that we're going to lose the opportunity, or that they're not going to do it. And yet I find that that's usually not the case. More often than not, people hear things or have been told things, but they don't have a lot of context for it. And so what I try to then do is carry that thread through. So, okay, you've heard that annuities are bad because they're too expensive. So let's talk about that. What is it? What would you be concerned most about if you were to use a vehicle like an annuity? Okay, well, I don't want to pay too much in fees. Okay, so and then we just kind of get into it, right? We say, well, remember how I was talking about how they're designed, and then we'll go into dollars and cents and numbers, and say, let's look at a hypothetical illustration so you can actually see what would happen, how the guarantee would work in a certain situation, because you want to know what you're paying for. And I tell people, like, okay, there's a cost to this. We don't have to hide it, and we don't have to be afraid that it's a number that's terrible. I mean, most of the really good variable annuity providers are fee compressed enough that you should be able to kind of design something to be, anywhere between 2.5 to 3.5 basis points all in, right? I mean, so not that that's a small number, but it's not 5%, right? That's not the hurdle rate that we're talking about. So whatever it is, like I'll go in and then, I want us to look at it so that way the client can start to really see, well, okay, this is what this is. Not just what somebody says it is or here, but if I give you live real-time example and we talk through and you understand, if I'm paying 3%, what am I getting for it? And I can see it visually, right? So that's the other thing, like psychologically, we wanted people, that's why a lot of these visuals make it easier for people to connect to this stuff than us just talking or us just getting right into an illustration. Because, we are visual learners. That's why, the number one search engine is Google. The number two search engine is YouTube. Just for everybody's benefit. So anyway, I don't believe in annuities. Probably one of my favorites. And I always say the same thing every time. Say, Michelle, that's great because it's not a religion. You don't have to believe in them. Usually sometimes gets a laugh or a chuckle. And then we kind of get into, well, what do you mean by that, right? Again, same type of approach. So what are some things that people are concerned about? And they're really concerned about the same things that we talk about, the pros and cons. I'm concerned about liquidity, or I want to be able to get access to my money. So if I give it to an insurance company, does that mean I can't get it back? And so then you just talk about that just head on, well, maybe, in this situation, this is how it would play out. You'd be able to get this, but maybe you wouldn't be able to go back in and just pull all the money back out. But then I'd ask them, well, why would help me understand, why is that a concern? Are you worried about a financial situation in retirement where you need to pull all of your retirement assets out? And we just very directly talk through all these things so that way the client can be, not stop themselves. A lot of the stuff that comes out is just, it's kind of a, I don't want to say it's a fear response, but it's, we're almost wired to think a certain way, but we don't really know why. And so, going through and just being very step by step, not feeling defensive, but just being conversational, usually you work through it all. And guess what? If somebody's hung up on one of these things, that's why presenting it this way still works, because then you can say, well, it sounds like, this really is a concern and maybe this option isn't going to make sense. Maybe we should look at these other two, see if there's a reason why we would, we might be working with these two instead of all three of them. So that's the other thing about it is there's, in my mind, and in very practical terms, there isn't an ejection someone's going to give me that still is going to cause me to not work with them and get the business anyway. It just is now it's just a question of where the money's going to go, not so much, are you going to want to work with me or not?
Thank you. Thank you. I think we have a few other questions teed up.
Fire away.
Yeah, Brian, I had a question. Rich here. How do you know how much of the client's funds to put into an annuity? I mean, you mentioned earlier, you like to try to cover expenses in retirement. I have a couple other advisors that stick to a hard and fast rule of maybe a quarter, a third, or a half of the bond portfolio goes into an annuity. But what have you found to be the most successful way to approach that topic?
So first of all, Rich, thank you for letting me pick on you in my examples. Appreciate that. Since we didn't set that up in advance, just in full disclosure, everybody. So the answer is not meant to be like this universal asterisk. It depends. It really does, though, right? It's each client situation is different. I think things that I'm mindful of, right? I'm mindful of the total assets at play as it might relate to then, and also what other sources of income a client's going to have, right? Because, maybe a client has $600,000 of investable assets that we're talking about, but maybe they have a decent Social Security number and a couple of pensions that make their retirement situation, maybe just in that alone, 80 or 90% of their potential income needs are covered by Social Security and pension. So, there's a balance, I think, between all of that. And it starts for me, Rich, with getting that income number first and aligning the sources, because that's kind of how I think I try to solve that question as to what needs to go where. Is that I start with, okay, well, what's the burn rate that we need to satisfy? And now how are we aligning the places that the money's going to come from? And there's a couple of things that can happen. For example, let's say a client wants to retire at 65, but we want to maximize Social Security. So we could be saying, well, Social Security, we may not be taking that for 5 years. So is there a part of this strategy that we're going to set you up to have a certain burn rate for a 5-year period that then we can pick up, knowing that this is going to now improve our income number for this period of time moving forward? Do we want to put maybe something in a guaranteed bucket to kind of, almost replicate what Social Security might be doing, or in part do that for that period of time, have it continue, but, maybe we do something that's, it's not just we set it up and it all just works in perpetuity. It might, but there can be moving parts to it. So I guess, I'm getting around to answering from percentage and all that. I think the other thing is, if you use annuities well, you shouldn't then have to, in a portfolio, in my opinion, go and invest in bonds. Because what should an annuity do for you? Mitigate that guaranteed risk, right? In one way, shape, or form. And the real risk here is income risk, not necessarily portfolio performance risk, because we're trying to maximize income creation. So if I'm using annuities to cover some of that and build this equation together, then if I'm also, if I'm investing in a variable annuity or in a portfolio scenario and I still have income annuities doing their thing, then that should theoretically reduce my need to, hedge, if you will, with income-based part of my portfolio. Why would I have a balanced portfolio and add a guaranteed income annuity or a variable annuity to that equation? Because then I'm just dragging down my potential growth rate. So I think that that's part of you want to look at the converging factors when you start to then allocate things. And I try to take the approach of, if we're going to take advantage of insurance company guarantees, let's try to maximize them with a minimal amount of money. So if an income annuity can give us a ton of juice and maybe get us to an income place where then really, you're just worrying about systematic RMD distributions, great. Why not do that? Right? And whatever that percentage is, I don't think there's a hard and fast rule for it to me. You do want to be careful. I say we can build these together, but arguments can be made that maybe you don't just go to one vehicle, especially if it is annuity, and then they don't have any other assets elsewhere. So I think more often than not, I'm still making sure that they've got some assets in an investment account or what have you. So they do kind of end up getting divided up. I don't know that I would have, everything go into a variable annuity or something like that. But if it does come down to a real design conversation, by kind of going through all these options and really tailoring it, we'll be able to justify whatever that decision is and justify those components. Does that help? Did I answer it?
Yeah, it was a very educated answer. It was a yes, no, and it depends answer. But I mean, that's what the answer is, right? So yeah, it depends on the situation.
Well, and it depends on what risks you're trying to mitigate and how you're trying to manage them. Because, an income annuity does a great job mitigating distribution risk. It's built for that. It should, in any scenario, you compare a variable annuity, a portfolio withdrawal, and an income annuity at age 65, for most people, the income annuity probably should have a very high number comparatively in terms of some of the other options. So, that's a good thing, meaning maybe what I'm using this particular guaranteed thing for is to squeeze as much juice with as little amount of money as possible and really mitigate that component risk. You can also do, so this is maybe, let's get out of the income annuity scenario. Maybe this is where we'll do kind of a stated dollar annuity So period certain annuity is what I mean. So same scenario I was describing, right? Where you've got a 5-year income cliff. Why don't we take a look at how much we would really need for those 5 years and how much a period certain 5-year annuity might provide us and what percentage of the portfolio is, and then say, well, if I can get the rest of the portfolio to kick butt for 5 years, and we're just talking about maybe, 18, 15, 20% of it, if we use and just literally pay that out effectively in a guaranteed manner to get you to Social Security, what will that do for the rest of it? Maybe that's a strategy, because sometimes that could be part of how somebody's working with. If you work with, we work with a lot of association executives, so some people that have 457 accounts, and those are required to be distributed over usually a period of 5 or 10 years. So that's one stopgap way that we almost have that built in. Part of their assets, they have to pay it out anyway. So, I can get pretty geeky when it comes to these kind of things, but I think, it's a lot easier to figure that out when you're knowing really what the drivers are going to be for the client. And then it's just, optimizing things from that point on.
All right, great, thanks, appreciate it.
Hey, Brian, Brittany here. I do have a question. First, I just want to say I really like your approach. I think this was a great presentation, so
Thank you.
for sharing it. Have you ever considered, I'm just curious, looking at cash value life insurance? So I know you touched on all the other areas. I'm sure you get this question a lot, so I'm just kind of curious.
No, absolutely.
Brian,
I'm a huge life insurance person. I was a life insurance specialist in a past life for a mutual agency for a period of time. So yes. So I'm going to probably take more time like I did for Rich to answer your question, because I want to make sure that I'm thorough, because it's a really good question. And so usually when it comes to cash value life insurance, so first of all, I'm a huge believer in using it as an asset to supplement retirement. So I want to get that out the gate. I think it's a tremendously valuable financial instrument that most people don't understand how to really effectively deploy, and they don't understand the power of life insurance. I'm not going to get on a soapbox for time's sake, but if you want, we can talk offline. I can tell you how I present life insurance in a very simple way that allows people to understand the power of it as a retirement supplement asset. But usually where that comes into play, if I'm having this conversation with, in a lot of client scenarios, is it's more often than not, we're really dealing with the stuff that was already earmarked for retirement. So IRAs, 401ks, that kind of stuff. And so this part of the conversation is 9 times out of 10, that's the asset piece that I'm dealing with. Now, if a client's kind of young enough and, we're a little bit bigger and we're building a savings strategy or a retirement savings strategy, not just really focused on ultimately the distribution part, then that's usually part of the conversation that, I have as a, well, how do we, because it's a couple of things, right? It's how do we squeeze as much juice out of the proverbial orange as possible? Knowing that, you don't have an unlimited amount of money each month to devote to any number of things. So we want to make sure that we're really wise with where we direct your resources and allow you to save effectively. But then it's also, are you a person that is going to phase out of a Roth because of your income or your earnings and all that? So do we need to try to build from a tax bucket standpoint to give you some kind of opportunity to have that tax conversation? And by the way, Brittany, all of us, everybody in this industry needs to find a way to be comfortable to talk to clients about taxes. And no, none of us, well, unless you're a CPA, if you're not a CPA, you get to say what I say all the time, right? I'm not a CPA, I just play one on TV, boom, boom, right? Okay. But we don't be afraid. Like, now is the time to be having this conversation. We've just spent $6 trillion with the T dollars in 18 months as a country. 18 months, 6 trillion. Just very, in not a political sense, telling people, what do you think that's going to do to our financial scenarios as a nation as we're having to now repay this? What do you think the impact's going to be on taxes, right? And just making sure people are reconciling with that, because most people don't think about that at all. So I think, now is a really good time to be having this conversation and seeing now not just the asset piece, but the tax piece in tandem. Also to make sure everybody understands the current tax legislation has taxes going up in, I always forget, either 2026 or 28. I don't remember what it was in the legislation, but right now, all Congress has to do to make sure that taxes will go up is nothing. That's it. They have to take no action, and it will happen over the natural course of the legislation enacted currently. So I know this is a little bit of a sidebar. I'm glad you asked that question. So I think, I try to frame a lot of that in that, it's a savings and a wealth building strategy that can feed into a distribution strategy. Now, if somebody has a lot of assets in a Roth or a cash value life insurance, then that's going to play into this income equation. So that's the other place that it comes into play. If you've done a good enough job and you've leveraged yourself properly, then now we're not just, we're getting that burn rate down. Now we're also thinking about, well, not just sources, but when should we take money from which bucket and why? Because we want to be as tax efficient, not just as income efficient as possible. So does that help?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Well, we're at the top of the hour, and I don't see any other questions. So I think with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Brian, wasn't sure if you had any closing thoughts for us.
No, I hope this was helpful. I know I covered a lot of ground and probably got into the weeds a little bit more on certain points. But just from a process standpoint, whether you decide that this is the way that you want to do this, or whether you want to take it and make it your own, my encouragement is just really try to embrace laying things out very easily this way, because clients really do respond to and appreciate people telling them all of their options and letting them make informed decisions. So, anything that you can take from this and use effectively, hopefully you can do that. So again, I appreciate the chance, the opportunity. And if you want to follow up questions, please do email me, check me out on LinkedIn. If the book can help you, great. Yeah, I'm here to be a resource. So thank you.
That's fantastic. We really appreciate it. So thank you to all of our participants today. A special thank you to Brian. Our brokerage managers will be following up with everyone who's on the call today, and we'll definitely make sure that, Brian, we get your email address out to everybody so that if they do have questions, and that is the point of the series, is for our top advisors to be able to create a peer-to-peer study group and be able to share these types of ideas. So again, with that, we'll wrap up. Thank you so much, Brian, and everyone. Make it a great day.